joins, I'll send you guys another link. Dr. Anta, yes, I will send all the links again during the session. It ended before we
You
could
can go
get
to
back.
physics department, physics HOD. He will give you the sections. He will also tell which section he can attend. Who is the candidate?
Candidate is he's in hometown, so he will be coming
Only online, huh? Fine, fine.
Okay, Nikhil has joined the session.
First floor. In the reception, please ask where is physics HOD. He will just guide you. Go there. He will tell which section and all because first year, as you know, they will be under physics and chemistry cycle. So department we won't allot them the sections. They are doing it right now. If you can go there, he will tell everything. And from tomorrow he can join the class.
online class.
Yes, yes. But offline classes have started.
Yeah, he will
Better.
come within 3
No
o'clock.
problem. Done.
Okay.
Naveen sir, Nikhil has joined the session. Okay, looks like there's some hold up in the meanwhile.
Apurva,
Naveen
will
sir?
you start?
Yeah, Nikhil has joined the session. You can introduce him and I will be starting.
Nikhil join. Did Nikhil join now?
Yes, yes.
Hi, sir.
Yeah, yeah. Nikhil has come. 1 second. Nikhil, are you there?
Yes, sir. I'm here. Is there any delay on my video conference, video streaming?
Yeah, Nikhil.
So I hope you can hear me. I hope everyone can hear me. Am I audible?
Yes.
Thank you.
Nikhil, you're not audible.
Yes, you're audible.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Now?
Audible.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, everyone. I think we all know Nikhil already because morning only he started off the session. I would like to introduce Nikhil for this session. Mr. Nikhil has done his BE from Computer Science Engineering from KSIT Bangalore. Regarding his work experience, currently he is working as a research analyst at Edureka. He was a developer at Aptus and also an intern at Survider. And as afternoon I said, he is also a participant of hackathons that happens and also a winner of Smart India Hackathon for Ministry of Civil Aviation and MHRD in 2019. And he is a winner of Hackfest at SJBIT. He is passionate about blockchain and also a hobby programmer. Thank you, Nikhil, for accepting our invitation. And afternoon already you started off your session, and you can just take over and continue. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me, sir.
Thank you.
So, um,
So before we get started with the session, we want to see what insights you gained from the previous session. So I'll be sharing another Mentimeter link in the chat and sharing my screen as well. So we can answer this question about, yes, so let me know when my screen is visible. I have shared a link in the chat.
yeah, it's
You can,
visible now.
yes, you can start answering the question. According to you, what is limiting the growth of blockchain innovation in India?
Ma'am, do we have to talk or we have to write?
You can type it in the link provided to you. You can also, if you wish to talk about it, we would love to hear what you have to say.
Actually, I'm not able to type because I am accessing from my mobile phone. We
No
can
problem.
talk as much as we have understood from the session.
Sure.
As per the my knowledge and your insight, and inside by the session chair in the morning. I feel the biggest roadblock for blockchain is the infrastructure in our country. And second thing is the people are not tech savvies, because we are very skeptical when we have to adopt to the new technology. Talk about the simple technology like mobile phone or Paytms. It was a big issue for us few years back, but nowadays it is just a nominal thing for us. So I think the biggest issue, biggest roadblock is the infrastructure, then the people to come out of their comfort zone to adopt the technology. That is what I can say, ma'am.
Absolutely, yes. All valid points, and especially where you mentioned that people are skeptical about adopting new technologies, that would be the biggest factor. Infrastructure, technology, yes. Uh, Inculcating such a program in your curriculum for a faculty training program, this is like a big step in introducing technologies like blockchain into making professors more aware about the technology, what it exactly is, and not just an entity that people use and they're not skeptical about it. Or again, block size and transaction speed, again, limitations in technology. We might not have the best infrastructure to be able to, like Nikhil mentioned in the previous session, there might be some areas where electricity and power resources are very easily accessible for very cheap. So that kind of payoff might not be feasible in countries like India. So we still have a long way to go. I'll keep this open for like 1 more minute if anyone else wants to contribute. Literacy rates, electricity mining hardware, yes, literacy rates is a big one. Scalability, mining infrastructure, cryptocurrency is too fluctuating for investing. Yes, the cryptocurrency fluctuation, that is a big factor for many people. That is a deterrent for investing your money. You could suffer losses, like Professor Anand mentioned in the morning. It is very difficult to keep track of what could happen in the blockchain value, the cryptocurrency value, without having a baseline to see how it changes. Without understanding how it works, you cannot necessarily gauge how it fluctuates. So having an understanding of technologies like this helps you get into it and be more aware of what you are investing in, or what you are investing time or money or effort, even if it means getting it into your existing technologies. Very valid point.
And not only that, 2 years ago, it was Ethereum was only $150 or something. Now it's 10 times. And Bitcoin, it's beyond anybody's range now to buy it, actually.
Yes.
That's
So
true.
that the fluctuation, it has the good and the bad. You could either become extremely profitable or suffer huge losses. So it is high
And
risk, high reward.
and not only that, due to pandemic and the economy is going down, people are pushing their money into cryptocurrency.
Yes.
And once the economy comes up, it will be going down. Cryptocurrency value will be going down a lot. Okay. That
Yeah.
happened in 2000 something. It went to up to 17,000 once, and it went down to 3,000 back. Okay.
Yes,
Good.
so I think you
Yeah.
were referring to an instance 3 years ago. Like you said, it peaked at $17,000 that year, and then in a couple of weeks, it just dropped down to 1/10 the price. So yes, highly fluctuable rates.
So looks like we're not getting in any more answers for this. I will let Nikhil start sharing the presentation so we can get into the session, and
Hello.
I will also share. Yes, hello.
Hello.
Hello. Yes.
Yeah, myself, Dr. Nirmala from AHC Engineering College.
Hi,
Hello.
Dr. Nirmala.
Good afternoon.
Yeah. So you were asking about what is the reason for the blockchain. The first thing what I feel is, as you already said, it can be one thing where economic is one of the concept, because certain things have to be centralized. Centralizing and decentralizing plays a very important role. See, we are talking about networking or maybe technology. So when I talk about technology, see, we are not focusing in the whole country. For example, if you take in the whole country, Bangalore is an IT place, we call it as. But whereas you take in case of Andhra or maybe our neighbor states, so there we can't talk about technology. So why don't we get it a centralized one? than getting a decentralized. That is one in talk about technology. And the next thing what I want to focus is when you talk about all this technology and the concept, promotion is very important. Bringing about awareness in the people. See, you, me, and talking, we know something about the technology. So you're going to spread it across the globe because everybody is not going to focus and get a inside view of what we are talking. So first we have to train the people, get the promotion, make them aware of the system, get the things centralized, get into economic crisis, then we can bring about the change in the society or technology. That is what I feel. Then we can also talk about other aspects. As we said, we can talk about what is called as a security or maybe promoting in terms of cryptography, etc. But until they get awareness of the system, no, I feel it takes some time for us to get back things. That is what I felt.
Absolutely, yes. And also somebody has given an answer in the Mentimeter link, Garibi. Valid point, and we will look into that. And also,
Yes.
still Bhumika says still vulnerable to a number of attacks where N is dynamic in nature. Yes, this is a cause of
Yes.
concern, but also there has been a lot of development, a lot of research in this area. Although India, like Dr. Nirmala said, there has not been very much exposure. There has not been a lot of education surrounding this. We are still a few steps behind. So as we as educators collectively make a decision to expose our students to this technology, will make them more aware engineers, inculcating these into existing solutions. So this will, yes, no trust, who will control standardization? Absolutely, yeah. So thank you all for your inputs. We have another first state to implement blockchain technology. Yes, Hemraj, was that in agriculture, if I remember properly?
It should be, yes, one of the technological implementations.
Yes, yes. No? Okay. Hemraj, would you like to
Would you like to
input
please tell?
certificate distribution? Okay.
Okay.
I think there was a agricultural implementation also in one of the states that did not get popularized, I believe. But yes, thank you all for your inputs. We will start with the for university and institute. Okay. Thank you for that information, Hemraj. Nikhil, do you want to share the screen and get started with the presentation?
Yeah, I'll just do that. Give me a second, please.
In the meanwhile, somebody asked for email IDs and links shared. I will be putting that in the chat, as a lot of you exited the chat last time and wasn't able to access it.
I hope all of you can see my screen.
Yes.
Yeah, yes.
Okay. So hi everyone, ladies and gentlemen. So in this session of blockchain, we would be briefly going through the key components of blockchain. What are the nitty-gritties, the small entities that make up the various security aspects and the privacy aspects of blockchain. And after that, we will just hover over how Bitcoins and cryptocurrencies work. Yes, I know we've spoken about them from the morning, but we will try getting more intrinsic as time permits. And towards the end of this session, like Apurva already mentioned, I will be, taking you guys over a small contract, a smart contract, which we will be typing and deploying on the go. It will be a small cryptocurrency token of our own that we will be generating for demonstration purposes. So I guess Apurva can take over from here. She can start the session and then we'll continue.
Yeah, sure. So, like we already talked about how blockchain system uses a decentralized or distributed method of handling requests. So as we all know, peer-to-peer systems are the foundation of most of the there is no one single entity controlling everything. So in a traditional client server architecture, there's one central server that handles all the requests. One of the biggest disadvantages of this is they are more susceptible to DDoS attacks, and also other than the attacks themselves, there is also the issue of bottlenecks. When all the peers in the system, all the nodes in the system are sending requests to one central system, there could be a bottleneck, and this can slow down everything else. There can be a lot of requests queued within the system, and decreasing the overall efficiency of the system. So having a peer-to-peer mechanism, a very good example of a peer-to-peer system would be torrents. If you are familiar with how a torrent works, basically every node in the network acts as a client or a server. So if I am a node in the network, I will request a file, and all of the other nodes in the network that have chunks of that file divide the file into chunks, and they all contribute to serving the request for me based on their availability of resources or the requested file. So when they share all the chunks of their file with me, at my end, I will assemble this in whatever order I need to form a complete file. So this has been a revolutionary mode of file transfers. And other than this, there are also web-based file transfers for. There is a protocol called interplanetary file system. This is also implemented within some blockchains. This also follows the same principle where instead of hosting files on a single server, all the nodes in the network contain the file, and they can be served within this at a higher speed, as it's not a one-to-one link, and everything is a little more faster, and one node in the network is not overburdened with requests and responses. Also, an obvious would be no middleman required, as we talked about it multiple times in the previous presentation. There would be no need for one entity to govern the transactions, to oversee whether these two transactions are happening, these transaction between two entities is happening smoothly, if it is happening in a fair basis. So the middleman would also involve some kind of transactional costs. You would have to pay them to make use of their services, and handling charges, handling fees. So we also see this in a UPI architecture. Middleman, the UPI charges some kind of transaction fees, like a very small amount, but this adds up in the long run. And also, we are able to eliminate the middleman purely because we have established trust in the system. At two entities, I don't have to trust the other entity to have a transaction with them, because blockchain, by the virtue of it, ensures that we have trust in the system. And again, given is no single point of failure, obviously, because all of the nodes are serving. Unless you have a majority of nodes overturned by an attacker, the network will continue to run smoothly. And in the early stages of Bitcoin, in the paper, yes, Dr. Anita, I will share that. The peer-to-peer electronic cash system is the title of the paper. So Bitcoin was idealized as a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. Now, of course, we have tons of new applications for blockchain, but this started off with the purpose for transacting cash, electronic cash, digitally. So everything is mentioned in that paper. I will send it right away. And again, immune to DOS attacks, because there are several nodes that are serving requests, and you would to be able to overwhelm the entire network, you need to be able to have enough capacity yourself to be able to send that many requests, to be able to attack the entire network to bring it down. So in case of a centralized architecture, in a client server architecture, you just have to attack the single server. But this will ensure that there are more areas where even if there is a attack, it can continue working. The system can go on smoothly. Nikhil, you can continue.
Yeah. So one of the major reasons Bitcoin and all blockchain implementations maintain trust without indulging in private information is the way they handle their key structures. So all of us know how public keys and private keys work. We know how public key infrastructures work, where two people who want to establish a communication exchange their public keys, encrypt the secret with their private key, and they can decrypt the secret at the other end only if they have a valid private key. So in a decentralized key architecture, it works very similar to a traditional public key infrastructure, but instead of having public keys in a decentralized system, the public ledger which the blockchain provides holds the information of all the public keys of all the users. So if, let's say, there are two users, Alice and Bob, Alice has her own public key, but this public key is hashed and stored in the public ledger and is registered against Alice's hash. So in that sense, Alice doesn't have to use her name, and it won't be recognized as Alice's public key. It'll just be Alice's hash's public key. So if Bob had to initiate a transaction with Alice or vice versa, one of them would have to go to the public ledger and obtain the public key of the other recipient. So if Alice is initiating a transaction, she would check the public ledger for Bob's, distinct identifier or public key. She would use that and her private key to entail a secret message, encrypt it, and transfer it to Bob. So in this sense, since it's an example, we're calling it a secret message, but in actuality, that could be a Bitcoin transfer or any data exchange through a blockchain mechanism. So once this transaction happens, Bob would refer to this public ledger to verify the authenticity of the sender. He would check that the public key on the secret message and the sender's key are, matching against the same entry in the ledger. That shows the proof and that builds the trust between two users because it's registered in a public blockchain ledger and it is immutable and non-repudiable. And then Bob uses his own private keys along with Alice's public keys to open this transaction data or the message. This is how in terms of a key infrastructure, this is how a transaction takes place between two blockchain users. So instead of revealing their public keys to each other and establishing trust, that part is eliminated and already taken care of by the public ledger implemented by virtue of the blockchain technology. And hence, it becomes a much more simpler key management system and also a much more secure key management system, which they use for identifying resources. So Apurva can tell you about how these keys act as signatures for validation.
So there is already the use of public keys and private keys, and using that within blockchains, you wouldn't want to put your private key in the blockchain. So instead of putting the private key, you will be creating a digital signature using your private key. That is maybe encrypting some kind of secret using your private key, and then using the digital signature and the public key. Both of these are put within the transaction block. Both of these details can let you know whether or not the sender that created the block, that created the transaction, is the legitimate sender, because using their public key, you can verify whether or not the private key belongs to them or it has been spoofed in some way. So using this, this is kind of the foundation for, this is also mentioned in Satoshi Nakamoto's paper, where they use validations of private key in the next block. Every subsequent block has a validation in its of its private key using the public key. And I think Dr. Anita has a question for you. Nikhil, you can maybe unmute yourself and ask.
Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you, sir. Sorry to interrupt in between. Only one thing, Nikhil sir and Apurva ma'am. Though we have read all
Yeah.
of these public and private key, can you kindly tell me how practical? Suppose I am the sender and you are the.
Excuse me, ma'am. I'm really sorry to interrupt. Could you please repeat
Dollars to
yourself?
be
I
say
think you're-
Apurva ma'am. Ma'am, what is what all I have to show here? What is my public key? What is my private key? What is my digital signature? Can you actually explain me practically? Because from book we can read it, but how actually what things we have to show here to make a proof of work or proof of that transaction? Can you practically tell, please?
Okay, I think the next slide will be covering that, how private keys and public keys are generated and handled within the ledger. So giving an overview of that, all of your public keys are tied with your identity and put in the public ledger, in the digital ledger. So everyone can verify your private key with whatever is given in the ledger. So Nikhil will be explaining that in the next slide.
So if you could just give me a second, I will open up a simple application to demonstrate how these keys would look in a ledger.
लैपटॉप ही बंद हो गया क्या है?
So,
Nikhil, are you sharing something else?
yeah, just give me a second. I'll open. Okay, so ma'am, this was a simple application which Apurva and I had developed a while ago. This was also achieved using blockchain. This was our attempt at getting a philanthropic, perspective of how blockchain can be used for philanthropy. So we have implemented a bare bones public ledger, and it would be of something of this category. So your from and to would be secrets. We have maintained it here. Hi, am I audible?
Yes, Nikhil.
Okay. So we have maintained it here because this is a administrator view. If not, this is how a public ledger would generally look. From, and it would be their 64-bit hash. To, it would be the 64-bit hash, and the timestamp when the transaction occurred. If not for the timestamp, with programmatic implementation, you could also include the amount registered, amount transacted, and other aspects like that. So here, this would be your public key because it is publicly delivered or displayed on the ledger. We have maintained only organization chart here. We have just maintained keys here. We have not shown the table whose key corresponds to which user. That would be also done on other public ledgers. But these keys that you can see, these 64-bit values, that would be a public key which would be available in a public ledger like this. You could pick one key from here, a trusted key, if you know who you're sending it to, and then you could enter this address as the recipient's address and further include transactions. You would have one more secret value that would be your private key, and you would have to enter that only when you are confirming your transaction. So I hope that clears your doubt, or if you still have any doubts, you could please ask us.
So this is clear. Thank you, sir. Thank you,
Okay.
Nikhil.
So
Thank you very
there is
much.
a little more explanation about this in a more diagrammatic format. So basically your block will contain your public key. Whatever block is added to your blockchain will also have your public key, and along with that there will be another identifier that is generated from your private key. So both of these together will validate that it is in fact you that initiated this transaction, that you created this block, and nobody is using your tokens to pretend that they are you. Nikhil, you can continue.
Yeah. So, ma'am, on the same topic that you asked us, so like you said, these hashes, these publicly available hashes how people will identify you or the transactions. This is one of the core components of blockchain too. Rather than one of the core components, it depends on how you implement it. The effectiveness of these components will maintain it. So like I just displayed, these hashes that you can see, we have taken 64-bit digest. It could be 32 bits, it could be 256 bits. It depends on how the programmer or how the developer wants to secure it, like what kind of, say, cryptographic algorithms he wants to use. He could use SHA-256, 512, or he could use Blake 2, he could use RSA-256, he could use ECC. So that is solely dependent on how the developer wants to, or the developer or the stakeholders, the business administration individuals. So all of those decisions they could take and implement it. We have taken 64-bit hash addresses here, and those kind of addresses are stored in the datas. So the first thing I will tell you is about the Genesis block. Genesis is like a Christian reference where it means the beginning of everything. And rightly said so, the Genesis block is the first ever block that we have to create for our chain to start. So in terms of a traditional data structure, this is the root node. And it would have, it will not contain any previous hash. We have to generate a completely new hash for this Genesis block and fill it with data. After this block is created, all the subsequent blocks, all the subsequent transactions that are performed will be a function of the hash of the Genesis block. So in this diagram, let's say there is block 1. So block 1 consists of 3 parts: the data that has to be stored, the hash of this block, and the hash of the previous block, that is block 0. So with these 3 bits of data, it will compute a new hash for this block, and the hash of that block will be used here in block 2. So when someone creates a new block after block 1, when they're creating block 2, what happens is they have new data. Let's say the data here says hello, and then there's the hash of block 1, which is this. Let's say the hash of block 1 is 123. So there's hello, there's 123, and there's pointer to block 1. So let's say the memory location of that pointer is an memory address on the spindle on the disk. So these 3 values, let's say 123, ABC, and hello, these 3 values are hashed using one of the cryptographic algorithms, and that produces a new hash. Let us say that new hash is 069. So block 3, when it points to block 2, the block 2's physical memory address on the disk which is stored is present here. Hash of block 2, which we computed to be 069 for this example, that is stored here. And the new data, which could be anything. Let's say the data here is a monetary value, 30 bitcoins. So these 3 values are hashed and a new hash is formed. So this is how hashes are used as addresses for everything in a blockchain system: for key management, for user management, wallet management, blocks, and transactions. All of them are based on hashes. So what is hashed exactly? So we will see the private key of the user, which we were telling. So while a transaction is occurring, let us just go back to this previous image once. So for a transaction to occur, there must be a sender. That is the sender's private key, the hash of the previous block, the data he wants to send, and the receiver's public key. So let us consider these few points: the block itself, sender's private key, receiver's public key. These few points could be included here. So this is a theoretic explanation of how one could, or how one encodes or hashes the values to achieve a Bitcoin address. So first, the private key of the sender is put through the ECC multiplication, algorithm, which generates a 32-bit hash. This is then paired with the public key of the receiver. So if the receiver, receiver's public key is also 32-bit hash, we would get a new 32-bit hash from here. After this stage, or the second stage, we see that we are using a double hash. A double hash would be security by confusion, and that would mean that we are trying to change the original message into a new form, and we have to make it completely unrelated, like a collision free hash, whereas no one can track the hash value to its original value or to its letter or the plain text form. It should be always a very distorted ciphertext. Here in this double hash, we would be using two protocols, SHA-256 and RIP EMD160. So these are two cryptographic algorithms which are used in tandem. First, you would take this cumulative hash of the public key, private key, and the ECC multiplication. You would get a target hash. Let's say we will call that target hash 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's a 6-digit hash. In reality, it would be 32, 64, or even 256 bits. We are just keeping it at 6 bits so that we can conveniently, calculate it or maybe play around with it. After it finishes the double hash, first it finishes a SHA 256 on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which might change it to 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then implementing RIP EMD 160 on it, it changes the hash completely to ABCD 1 to F. So that is the new hash. And then the public key hash. So this public key hash is the one that is stored in the excuse me, public ledger. So this is the receiver's address. The public key that we are speaking about here is the sender's public key, and this is the sender's private key. Here it is the receiver's public key, which we would be using, which we would be taking from the public ledger, and then it would hash 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 that value with this public key using another cryptographic algorithm. And after it passes through multiple rounds of hashing, it finally arrives at 164 bit address, which we will use as the final address for the block. In the same way, we can generate addresses for blocks, public keys, private keys, and so now that you've seen how many multiple rounds of hashing and security by confusion is performed, we can see that the original data has been highly mixed up or highly jumbled and reshuffled, so that no hacker or no malicious attack vector can take over the system or comprise the secrecy.
Hash pointers and data structures, like there was a question from Urvi. What if an attacker knows the actual block address and tries to update the new block between two existing blocks by changing the previous hash address of the block? How does the system overcome such an attack? So this would not be a very easy to do operation, because the next block is not just maintaining the address of the previous block, it is also maintaining the hash of the entire contents of the block. So if I change something in a block, all of that block and all of the next hashes are also affected. So Nikhil changed something in block 2, and block 3, although the new hash of block 3 is maintained in block 3 as the previous hash, it does not compute into a valid value, because the hash generated for block 3 is still not accurate. So this will have an avalanche effect into all of the blocks until the end, and this is very evident to the rest of the chains in the block, the rest of the nodes in the blockchain. Yes, hashing capacity and sufficient hashing power. Yes, execute a 51% attack orphan block. So yes, this is what I explained in the previous session, how without, if a new block, if they try to add a new block and this is not sufficiently validated by the rest of the blocks, it is not added to the blockchain, because it is called because since it does not comply with the rules set by the block, since they could not validate it, there was no consensus result for this, they would have had to abandon this block. That's why it is called an orphan block, as in it cannot belong to the blockchain. So this 51% attack theoretically is fairly easy to execute on smaller blocks. Let's say here in our example we have only a 5 chain block, right? So here it will take me barely a couple of minutes to crack every hash in this. But if in reality, real implementations of blockchain, there are far more blocks with far more people, nodes overseeing everything that happens, the activity within the blockchain. So to be able to crack this and get over get accurate values for all of these, it would take a very unimaginably large amount of time with the amount of compute power, let's say a traditional attacker has. So this 51% attack comes into play when an attacker can overpower a basic majority, a 51% majority of the nodes, and in this way they will be able to have sway the consensus in their favor to accept a faulty block as a valid block. That's why an attacker would need to have at least a control of at least 51%, hence the name. But this would theoretically be very hard to achieve in a blockchain with millions of nodes. If let's say the block chain has like a million nodes, it would be really hard to get control of 500,000 nodes. That would need a lot of compute power, need a lot of resources. It is protection in numbers, if you will. So Nikhil, do you want to
On
elaborate
the
on that?
same topic, touching upon the same topic, even if an entity or a malicious, person wants to perform a 51% attack, let's say he tries to gain control of half or majority of the network. This would be a very serialized process. Let's say there's this block that I have tampered with. Let's say I start mining it. Let's say I've gained 51% of the whole, what do you say, blockchain. I would have to wait this long just to mine one single block, and then that would change the values for the next block, which I have to mine again to make it a valid block, and then I would have to change this again. In the meanwhile, what happens is this creates two branches or two forks from, let's say, block number 2, where I did this. We'll just go on to this section. So in block number 2, let's say when I change something, the rest of the chain is affected, or it sometimes could split into two chains depending on the implementation, where one chain on another peer is still unaffected with the valid transactions, but the nodes and the chain where the hacker tried attacking, those are changed, and he has to start mining these one by one. In the meanwhile, the valid nodes or the honest nodes could always check the other nodes in the distributed ledger to verify if the valid transactions, if these transactions are valid or not. So blockchain has, its own caveats, but it is also developing with time to overcome these caveats.
Yes, and yes, there is also a probability that a malicious miner can perform an FAW attack, that is fork after withholding. So blockchain fork is basically, instead of maintaining one single chain, it branches into a different, let's say a different branch, two branches maintained in the same blockchain. So usually they are designed to maintain only the longest chain and remove the lower chain, the shorter chains, and add it subsequently to the longer chains. Because when there are multiple branches, the FAW attack along with replay attacks are also, they're also susceptible to replay attacks. But in the interest of time, we will not get into this. This definitely increases the attack surface for the whole blockchain. But tomorrow's session cover a lot of threats and attack surface and all of that. So we're not going to get into that too much right now, since we still have some more topics. But yes, the FAW attack is a valid statement, yes. So yeah, Merkle trees, as we've already talked about this is basically a tree linked list. Linked list like a tree, but makes use of hash addresses as well. So this use of Merkle trees, as we touched upon in the previous session also, instead of maintaining one document per transaction block, we can add multiple documents and represent it as a Merkle tree format and encase all of that within one single block to reduce overhead. So I'll just show you a demonstration of what a Merkle tree looks like. Nikhil? So a tree, usually in an ideal blockchain scenario, all of these would be maintained as a single link, single chain. But sometimes branches can occur, but they're quickly merged into the longest branch. So Merkle trees, explained very simply. So we have L1, L2, L3, L4 at the bottommost layer. They are data blocks. They contain no other hashes. So one level above that, we have hash 00, hash 01, hash 10, hash 11. So each of these contain data for each of their blocks along with the hash of the entire block in the lower layer. So when the hash of this lower layer is added into that, it increases the complexity of that block by a little bit. So in this layer above this, hash 0 and hash 1, the hashes of both of these, hash 00, hash 01, are combined and hashed together. So it is a hash of a hash, and hash 10, hash 11 are combined and hashed and put into hash 1. So already by the time we reach this level, there is a hash of a hash of a hash. So in the top level, it has a cumulative hash of the data of 0 and 1. Whoever is unmuted, please mute
Hello.
yourself.
I'm uploading the question paper now. This year. Once I upload, I'll put a message. Okay, just 2 minutes. Uploading. Okay.
Okay, so please keep yourselves muted. We have a little disturbance. Okay, so the top hash contains hashes of each of these blocks. Every level has the hashes of all of its bottom levels. So you can imagine if I wanted to, let's say, add a random block at in between hash 1 and hash 11, it would need to comply with the hashes that have been done until this level. So higher up you go, it contains more hashes and makes it that much difficult to crack. So Merkle trees are a foundation data structure for this. This, along with the general cryptographic structures in general, has been able to make blockchain what it is today, a very secure means of storing data and transactions. So moving on.
We will just take a small look at how the internals of Bitcoin works. We know that Bitcoin is a blockchain implementation, but we will see how specifically Bitcoin works, how one mines for cryptocurrency or tokens, and how the entire transaction process works. So to take a small overview, this is the network, let's say a decentralized network, the blockchain network, which occurs. There are miners who use their own dedicated hardware to solve computational problems presented in the nodes in this network, and upon solving those problems, they get rewards in terms of cryptocurrencies from these networks, which can be used. These cryptocurrencies can be traded like conventional currencies. You could buy utilities with it. You could trade it for goods and other implementations like that. In the same way, for these bitcoins to work, you need a wallet. Like how we store money in a purse or a bank account or a wallet, the same way a bitcoin or a cryptocurrency wallet is the parallel or a tangential drawn to a traditional bank account, in which you could keep different kinds of cryptocurrencies and trade them. So since that is how a Bitcoin, network works, you mine for coins, you validate transactions, and you get cryptocurrency in return or as rewards. So now we will see how the mining process occurs. So like before we get into the intricacies of it, Apurva would like to explain to you in very simple terms of how mining would work.
So they say you haven't fully understood a topic unless you could explain it to a child. So if you had to explain Bitcoin mining to a child, you would say, let's say I have 3 friends and I am thinking of a number between 1 and 100. It is a random number. So whoever guesses the number and whoever is closest to it gets rewarded. Let's say a chocolate. So in this way, I will just tell each of my friends that they have one chance to guess whatever number I'm thinking of. Let's say I'm thinking of the number 17, and my first friend guesses 50. So they're obviously out of it, and the second friend guesses something like 16, and the third friend guesses something like 14. Even though 16 is closer to my guess number, uh, if I have a condition like whoever guesses a number lesser than my number, they get the chocolate. So there will not be any specific favoring for who guesses these values more closely. It is more of the compute effort spent into solving these computations. So these would not be some very simple addition or multiplication problem. These would be something like triple integrations or graphical problems, very intense mathematical problems that would use a lot of your CPU cycles. So expanding that analogy, let's say instead of 100, my number between 1 and 100, instead of that, you were asked to guess a 256-bit hash. That is so much more, that has a wider range of guessing than just this. So it is not possible to just guess a random number and acquire a reward. In here, the chocolates would be the crypto tokens that you would be getting. So it is that much difficult. And instead of my 3 friends, it would be, let's say, 3 million nodes in a network that are all trying to arrive at the correct answer. They're mining the correct answer to arrive at the correct solution to make sure that this transaction is valid. So all this effort goes into Bitcoin mining, and because of this, they are rewarded as a form of tokens or cryptocurrencies, which will be explained by Nikhil.
So thank you, Apurva, for explaining it to the child in me.
Just 1 second. E by n probability, where the participants out of n participants might guess the same number. This you will have to consider the sample space here. The sample space here would be a 256-bit hash. That is a lot of combinations. So a hash 256-bit, each of these would be millions of combinations of zeros and ones. So this would not, there is no, although there is E out of n probability, it is infinitesimally small. And even if they do guess the same number, they are rewarded equally. The reward is split amongst each other.
Apurva, could you please repeat the question? I think I have a clarification to make for that.
Okay, they say there is E out of n probability where the E participants out of n participants might guess the same number. Here n is the number of miners.
Yes, that is true. That is a very valid question. There are a lot of cases or scenarios where, a few miners, I wouldn't say one or two, n miners can arrive at the same, conclusion in the same amount of time. So, Apurva explained how the guessing mechanism works. So you would be, your systems. So we all have heard of, these traditional quotes saying you need a lot of GPU to run or to mine cryptocurrency. You need to have too much hardware to mine cryptocurrency. All of this is needed because, like Apurva mentioned, imagine there are 256-bit hash values that you have to compute. So mining occurs in two processes. One part of mining, like Apurva explained, is a computational, analogy where computing the right hash values or arriving at it with guesswork at the right hash values is one form of getting rewards. The other form of getting rewards, the one which entices most of the users, is validating transactions. So the more number of transactions you validate, the higher the chances of you getting a rewards. But that does not mean that every time you validate transactions you will get bitcoins in rewards. No, it's a bias, or it is a luck based system. So what happens is you have to simultaneously perform two tasks. One is validate the existing, transaction, not the existing transaction, the new transactions, and adding them to the public ledger. And the other is, using your CPU to mine the correct answer, the correct hash value. So there are various scripts and programs mining tools developed by open source communities which you can use to mine cryptocurrencies. So if, let's say, two people arrive at the same hexadecimal value, like Apurva mentioned, it does not have to be the same exact value. It could be equal or lesser than equal to the value which has to be guessed or which is provided by the crypto system.
So one thing I want to ask is, who sets the value? It should be less, you're telling, no? That limit, who sets actually?
So that's how the consensus protocol was designed. The crypto system, the Bitcoin network, when they are generating hashes for the blocks and transactions, they publish these secret hashes. Like, they don't publish it, they keep it as a secret message. So like Apurva said, she thought of a number, but here this number is not just guessed or thought. Once a crypto transaction occurs, the block that is formed, that block's hash address, it will not be visible before being validated. So it will be, let's say, in a metaphoric secret envelope. So the hash value is written and kept inside. You have to just guess, arrive at an answer, and then compare if you've got the right answer or if you're closer or lesser than it. So,
but how your peer node will know that this is the value that you're going to compare?
So there will be no peer nodes who will know. All the miners have to, mine and use their CPU cycles against the consensus algorithms. The algorithms which calculate the hash values, they will keep it as a secret from all the nodes until one of the miners either guesses it or validates enough transaction blocks.
So it means that all the miners will know that secret code, is it?
No. So it means they won't.
But everybody will have the same value, is it?
No, they won't. So let's say there are millions of miners and there are millions of transactions. I could be guessing the code for, let's say, transaction 2, whereas the node has provided you a transaction 20 and you're trying to guess the challenge of transaction 20. So it depends. In very rare cases, or like you said, if two miners occur at the same problem and both of them had to guess the same secret code, whoever does it first gets it. But if both of them guess it at the same time, whoever has validated, or whoever has registered more transactions, whoever has validated more legal transactions, gets the reward. So this is how proof of consensus comes into play. So you'll have to do two tasks simultaneously. One is guess the hash number. Two, just make sure all the transactions that are happening are valid or not. So when you perform both these functions, there is a chance of you getting a reward. So like if you don't mind, I would take an analogy to a plant where planting the seeds is like trying to guess the number. You never know if it will germinate or not. Whereas watering the plant every day is a continuous process where you are nourishing it and where you are validating or taking care of the plant, physical plant. Let's not let's ignore the external factors like sunlight, pH, and other factors. In an ideal scenario where all of that is in normal condition, planting the seed, you have a chance of getting fruits even without watering it. Rainfall and other factors might help grow that plant and you can get a reward out of it. But a more dedicated way is planting a seed and watering it every day so that you see the plant grow on your own. So in those similar terms, validating transactions or blocks would be your daily task or the main task of a miner or an authoritative node, and guessing these numbers for the tasks would be like a lucky draw or a lotto of getting a reward faster. I hope that's clear. If it's not, you could ask me questions, like if there is any aspect which you think I might have not explained clearly, you could please ask me questions.
Yeah, Nikhil, you can continue. I think there.
Yeah. So thank you everyone. That was our presentation for session 2. We tried pondering over how mining works and how mining in Bitcoin works. So now, like we already mentioned, we will just build our own coin system, our own token system, and deploy it on the internet. We will do it all on the go on the internet on an online IDE. So if everyone can see my screen, could all of you please open this IDE? It's called Remix, REMIX. So if you
I'll send the link in the.
in the messages, please. So if all of you could just open up Remix once and see if it's opening in your browsers, we can start with the session with the
Thank
programming.
you, Hemraj. The
So in the meanwhile,
presentation, Dr. Anita, we will try to. This is made in an online presentation tool, so we might not be able to export it directly, but we will try to compile all of this information into a document and share it with you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. So once everyone's done, thank you. So once everyone is anyone facing issues with opening the IDE?
Yeah.
REMIX, then we are not simultaneously. What is this? REMIX, then
Mr.
OS
Hemraj
operating
has
system.
put the link in the chat. You can open that.
Okay.
yeah.
So that is an ID for Solidity.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
So in the meanwhile, by the time you can open the ID and try familiarizing with it, I will just give you an overview or a brief of what we are planning to do today or what we're intending to do and what we will achieve out of the activity. So we have already introduced the terms of smart contract. So smart contracts are these programmable, entities that live on these blockchain systems. And what they do is they eliminate human intervention. They are the set of rules and regulations which will help validate, or which will help, what do you say, verify the transactions that occur in a crypto system or in a network. So all these smart contracts traditionally are built in Solidity, and Solidity is the main functional programming languages if you want to build smart contracts for Ethereum and other Ethereum based derivatives. So Solidity is a functional programming language. It is much like, it takes inspiration from Java, C, Python, and JavaScript. So today we might not be able to get into the complete details or intricacies of how Solidity works, or every single syntactical point of how Solidity is and what are its functions, what are its advantages. Our aim for the day is writing a smart contract in Solidity, a very simple smart contract in Solidity, and then executing the same smart contract to transfer tokens among two addresses on the online ID. So is anyone facing any problems opening the ID?
Sir, we have opened it.
Okay, that is great.
Nikhil, I think you've stopped sharing your screen.
Oh, okay, just a minute. I'll Is my screen visible?
Yes, sir, it is visible.
Okay, thank you. So my ID, I have opened it. I have just cleared all the default provided programs. You might find a couple of them or three of them, Solidity smart contracts. So maybe after this session, you could experiment with those contracts. I will teach you how to, write a smart contract, how to compile it and run it. Maybe after this session is over, you could experiment more, you could venture more into how Solidity works and what are the different programming constructs it offers. So let us begin with this session.
You can code along with Nikhil here. He will be typing it out on the screen, but at the end of this, we will also send you the code so you can refer to it at a later point.
Yes, I will post it on codeshare.io. I will share this link on the team chats once I'm done with the program, a functioning program. I will share the code with you. You can try it on your own systems and see if it's running at your local machines. In the meanwhile, under the browser folder, I'll just create a new program. We will call this, let's say, DemoCoin. And .sol is the extension for Solidity programs and the smart contracts. So we're naming it DemoCoin.sol. Okay. So under DemoCoin.sol, the first thing that we need to enter in Solidity language is the pragma keyword, following with 2.70. Okay, so what this sentence here syntactically does is pragma keyword, when it is read by the compiler, it makes sure that the version of Solidity that we are using is greater than 0.7. So the pragma keyword is solely used for determining the version of Solidity or determining the version of the compiler on which this smart contract has to be compiled and executed. The latest version of Solidity is 0.8. So we could also write it like this. Any versions between, greater than 0.7, 0.8, all those versions would be perfectly running in this environment. So the next thing we would be doing is directly building our contract, our smart contract, and we would do that with the contract keyword. So the contract keyword, like it's a very self-explanatory keyword, would build a smart contract, and we have to provide the same name as that of our program. The name of the contract should be the name of the program. So here, let us, include a few, normalities in our program first. Let us give our, coin a name. So every coin like Bitcoin, Ripple, Litecoin, everything has a name. So in the same sense, we should also give a name to our coin. So it would be a string, and in Solidity it is mandatory to mention the access specifier. So we'll just keep it at public for our demo purposes. You could venture with it later. Let us name our coin DC. So it would stand for demo coin.
So you can name these whatever you want in your implementations. This is just a example.
Yeah, this is just for our demo purposes. Since it's a variable, you could change it to anything that pleases you, and it should run without any hiccups. Let's give the coin a symbol. So like how we have rupee and dollar symbols, sometimes when systems or this thing don't have enough space for characters, they would just for strings, they would just be done short with simple characters. So
this is also how Bitcoin is often represented as BTC. So this would be something similar to that.
Yes. So okay, to avoid confusion, let's call this demo coin, and then we would name our symbol demo coin, DCN. So I hope there's no doubts till here. Everything should be fairly simple.
Nikhil, why you have kept two blank? What was the reason? We have to create something there.
No. So this is an online IDE, right? It just auto formatted the code as I was typing it. I haven't kept it. Okay. You could, you do not have to follow formatting. It should still work.
Perfect.
Yes, ma'am. So now in the contract, let us create a mapping function. So this hash map, what it does is it will relate the address of the sender and the receiver and the amount that has to be transacted. So let's call it the mapping function. A mapping function is inbuilt. So, we don't have to worry about its implementation. It takes in two parameters. One would be the address, and the other would be the type of data that you would be giving. So in Solidity, you do not specify integers as int or int, but instead we use uint, which stands for unsigned integers. That is a programming construct in Solidity. They do not have any signed numbers. They only use unsigned numbers. So we would be using a 256-bit number. We do not have to necessarily store a 256-bit value, but we have the option if we need to. We'll call this method balance. Okay. Then let us create an event. So these events will trigger the above mapping function. So let me just finish this function and I can explain to you in depth how this works or what it does. So our transfer event would require address from. So this is the sender's address, then address to, which is the receiver's address, then excuse me, yeah, the value. We're just typecasting the type here also, because then we'll know in these abstracted methods what has to be passed. Next, we will build a constructor for this contract. So this will again be public. Inside this constructor, we will just, create, excuse me. So here we're just creating a dummy balance for our Coinbase. We are taking the value of 10,000. We could change it to anything, probably 189. So these are the amount of
Nikhil,
yes.
I think you'll have to give a space after before the underscores address from address to, because they're identified. Address space underscore from.
Yeah. I thought the formatter would do that. Okay, thank you very much.
And value.
Yeah, yeah, I did.
Yeah. It's balance, not balance. You've defined it as balance.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Line 8 says balance. You need to make both of them balance, or both of them balances.
Line 8 and oh yeah, my bad. I'll just make this balance.
Okay.
Yeah. So here we're just giving them a callback to this mapping address, where we're just initializing a number of coins here as of now. Next, we will write the function which we will use to send the coins. So a function keyword is used to define a function, and we will use send coin. That is the name of our function. So address of receiver. Address of receiver. Okay, 256 amount, and we would also require this method to return Boolean values. So this Boolean that we are sending would be a message to determine if there is enough balance in the sender's account. So we do not want double spends. We do not want to transact money without even the minimum balance. So for that purpose, we would be using this Boolean string here, which will throw an error. So let's start. So the first thing would be if the balance of the sender is less than the amount which he wants to send, then we would directly reject this claim. we return false. Otherwise, what we do is we remove the set balance from the sender's wallet. Minus equals, yeah. So here, if first we're checking for a condition if the sender has enough money, enough balance in his account, and if he does, then we would be first eliminating that said amount of balance from his account, and then we would be adding the same amount in the receiver's account. So balance of receiver. Okay, we have used receiver as the keyword here. So yeah, the said amount would reach the receiver. Once this is done, we would emit the transfer. So this emit function, what it does is it gives us a log kind of information where it shows us a message of the sender, the recipient, and the amount transacted. So we would be showing those exact things: the sender, the receiver, and the amount transacted. And we would end the function here with true. Okay, so this function, we have used it to send the coin from the sender to the receiver. We have used one stagnant sender here, that is us or the own system, because making it a dynamic process for both sender and receiver would be too complicated immediately. So we would do that, you could experiment with that later. You could take some more time and practice, and you could do that later. Now we will write a function which will get the balance for the sender. So in case we try to perform a transaction and it throws an error message, we will at least know how much balance is left in our account. So another function, we'll call this get balance. Then we need the address. So ADDR would return the address of the sender or the address of our system. So here also we will return the amount that is present in our system. So we would just return one simple statement, balance of address. Okay, so this is our program. It's a fairly small and simple program. Now I'll just take 2 minutes and try explaining the program to you before we compile it and we run it. So we create a contract, and all these are the rules inside a contract. So once this contract is deployed on the network, all the transactions would occur according to the rules specified inside this contract. So what we've done is, here we're creating a mapping function called balance, where we're mapping key value pairs, where the key is the address of the sender and the value is the balance or the amount left in his bank account. So address would store 64-bit hash addresses, where the integer values would store 256 bits worth of integer balances. Then we are creating an event transfer. So this is event creates an actionable event. Um, it would not do anything except for creating the logs of these transfer. So what it will log is the address of the sender, address of the receiver, and the value that is sent. The next, we are creating a constructor. So this constructor will create the sender's account, and it will fill the sender's account with the said amount of balance. Here we have included that as 10,089 tokens. It could be anything. We could just keep it as 1 token or 10 tokens. And in a real life scenario, based on the amount of actual currency he gives and purchases, the number of tokens, that would be updated in this value here. Next, we would be creating the function sendCoin, which takes these parameters, that is the address of the receiver. Like I mentioned, the address of the sender is fixed because since this is our local instance, we would be the senders, the amount that he has to send, and just a fail-safe mechanism, a Boolean return, just in case the transaction fails. So we could call this the core of our smart contract, because all the rules that we require to complete a transaction have been mentioned inside this block of code itself. The first if statement checks the user's account to see if the amount is greater than the balance that he has. That is obviously a faulty transaction. He cannot do that. He would have a shortage of funds. So we would eliminate that condition right here. We would return a false. Otherwise, the sender, his amount gets remitted from the account, and the same amount will be added to the receiver's end. And after this is done, what we're doing is we're emitting this transfer. Excuse me. Excuse me. So what this emit does is, do you remember the event we have triggered here, transfer? Emit will complete this function where it will change the balances for both the accounts, and then it will call the transfer with these values, that is the address of the sender, which we have mentioned here. This is a parameter. Address of the receiver, which we will enter, which is the parameter here, and a 256-bit value or the amount. So this function that we have mentioned here, get balance and address of the sender, this is used just to specifically check the balance that we have in our this thing in the user's account. So I hope all of you have understood this. Does anyone have any doubts regarding this code, like any discrepancies with this code? We will compile it, we will execute it, that is secondary, but has everyone else understood the gist of this code?
Yes, so we have understood, but whether we have written the correct syntax or not, that we will come to know after running the program.
Yeah, Nikhil, one question to you, Nikhil.
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
Can you please tell me what is the difference between using view returns and return in both the function sendCoin and get balance?
Okay. So the view return function, what we're doing is we're directly sending the log to the console. Here, what we're doing is, even though we have to return something, we're emitting this function to display the messages for us. Actually, here, once we return true, this function won't show us anything. So we won't get a log, because if it returns a true Boolean, it'll just sit. And we're using this function to emit the answer or our desired log. So here I'm just showing the view returns to show what it is returning from this function directly, instead of like a print statement. So I hope that clears your doubt.
Thank you so much. Go ahead.
Yes, yeah. And ma'am, coming back to your topic, the syntax, I agree, it might not be easy to catch up. I will copy all this code after executing it. I will host it on this platform. I will share the link with you people in a couple of minutes after I execute the program. Then maybe you could copy and paste the programs into your own Remix IDEs. And
we wrote ourselves the program. When you
okay.
were saying, we were also writing. I'm telling, while writing, maybe might be some syntax errors from our side. Otherwise, every code, whatever you wrote, it is clear to us.
Okay, thank you.
There
Thank
can
you.
be syntax errors, logic, it's clear.
Yes, okay, ma'am. So if there are syntax errors, all of us can sit together and clear it. So
Yeah.
first, so this is our demo coin. Let us just save this.
Nikhil, line 27, you've deleted function.
Oh, my bad. Okay. Oh, okay. Remix ID, my bad. Yeah, okay. So I have saved this code and it is throwing me an error. What does it? Source file requires different compiler versions. So the nightly bills are to be strictly.
I think it is 7.0.
Yes, that is correct, sir. It is 7.0. We could eliminate this for now. I hope all of you had copied that part. It should still work. It will not throw any errors. Okay. Okay, I have misspelled transfer here. Just part of the code.
Hello, in Pragma Solidity at the top first line, sometimes they give greater than and less than, okay,
Yes.
the version number. So for compiling, you have to use the higher version, is it?
So no, sir. It depends. If you have, let's say, a physical compiler like running on your local environment, and if it is of Solidity version 0.7.8, let's say that, and the latest version of Solidity is 0.8.3. So while mentioning in Pragma, when we give greater than and lesser than symbols, with this statement, what we mean is any version of Solidity compiler greater than 7.0, 0.7.0 should be able to handle this code perfectly.
Okay.
So when it
compiler wise, you can use any compiler, is it?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So there is just a warning here which says you have made your public, you have made it visible for everyone, but we can ignore it for now because we'll keep this public for the sake of our experiment. So now that we have this saved, you can see there are two other artifacts that are created along. There's the democoin metadata and the democoin.json. So
Nikhil, sorry, I missed a point. When you wrote the program, how you run it, what you click to run the program?
Yes, ma'am. So before we run the program, we'll have to compile it. Okay, I'll explain this later. I'll just show you how to compile it. So can all of you
run the program? How you run the program? Sorry, what you did?
I haven't run it yet, ma'am.
Achha,
yeah. Okay. So we will go to the Solidity compiler. So it's the button right below the file explorer, the second button. When you come there, you can see various versions. So the compiler that this online IDE provides is 0.7.4 plus commit. So that is their internal version of the compiler. So since we have mentioned in our code, anything greater than 0.7.0 should be fine. It will run on this instance. The language is Solidity. You have option for another language called Yule. It is also an experimental language in which they build smart contracts. But Solidity is the more well-versed language, which is gaining popularity throughout the Ethereum community. We will not bother about the EVM versions. An EVM stands for Ethereum Virtual Machine. So an Ethereum Virtual Machine is very much similar to a Java Virtual Machine, which all of us have read about. And what it does is it acts like a sandbox where it runs all these smart contracts, and it takes the smart contracts binaries and applies it on the blockchain network. So that is a very core technical term of putting out the smart contract onto the blockchain system. So we don't have to worry about all those implementations. The EVM will take care of it. The developers for Ethereum have provided us with this. So we have to just write our Solidity smart contract, compile it. So here we can see that I have compiled democoin.sol. All of you might not find the same thing here, because if you have multiple files in your file explorer with multiple Solidity files, all of them might be displayed here. Wherever we have written this code, that file we should compile. So just clicking on it, it should compile, and below here it will show you warnings. Okay. So our first warning says SPDX license identifier not found. Okay. Okay. So my bad, I forgot a line of code. I hope all of you can also edit the program with me. Yeah, we'll finish that line first. So the first line for this format of code should be this commented version. So an SPDX license is specific to the Remix IDE. The developers have mentioned that we should enter this snippet. Yeah. So I hope we could add that line of code. Yeah. Now let's save it again. Let us compile it again. This time it shows us only one warning saying that we have an abstracted public constructor. We can ignore that for now because we have explicitly programmed it that way. Then we can go to the next section. The symbol right below the compiler, it says deploy and run transactions. So we can go to that section. Yeah. So when you go to that section, we can see various things here. They have a lot of accounts. These are the sender accounts I was telling you about. So there are multiple accounts that we have here. We will be using the first one, the default one. A gas limit. What a gas limit specifies is, how much work or how much computation, how much it can burn. So I hope we can recall from memory. I guess Dr. Anand was while talking about a few proof of this thing concepts, proof of work, and other consensus mechanisms, he also mentioned proof of burn. So a proof of burn is for Ethereum, where you burn certain gas limit, or the amount of cycles or processing power that you put in, that is your gas limit. So if you cross this threshold, it's like telling the system that it is not worth mining for this coin, for that said cryptocurrency anymore. You could stop and not waste any more resources. So we don't have to worry about the value. We have mentioned the value right here inside our smart contract. And this here is a symbol for their token. It should not really bother us right now because we have named our token demo coin and this is our symbol. So we don't have to bother about these values. You can see that my contract has already been compiled and loaded here, the demo coin. You could, so publishing to IPFS is if you have any IPFS file systems hosted, you could deploy your blockchain network on that. So we don't have to do that. We could uncheck that for now, and I will just deploy my smart contract. So I will just take just a second. I would like to expand, the size of my, So here we can see at the bottom of the screen, we are starting to get inputs. When I said deploy, it created the Genesis block. So the transaction hash is this. Is the screen visible or do I need to expand my screen? Just give me a second. Yeah. Is it better now? So yeah, we see that this is the transaction hash. This is the contact address. This is from. So that is the default account that we have used here. And to. So since we haven't sent the cash to anyone, it is sending it to our own, constructor here. We'll start the transactions and that time we will see how the blocks are formed. We see that the value is 0 because we have not sent any coin yet. So once we press deploy, at the end of this section, we should see that there is this drop down menu, which is our program which is running. This should scroll down. Yes. Once it scrolls down, we can see that we have more functions. This is send coin function. This is the get balance function. This is the name and the symbol of the coin. These are clickable buttons, but we really don't need to bother about those because those are fixed for us. Let us send a coin to an address. So let us use one of these addresses. So I am picking one address at random and I am copying it. And then I'm changing back to this as a sender account. So if I send coin to this person, this is the address and this is the other address. And let us send 10 coins. So when we click on send coin, okay, there was an error. Okay, my bad. I had to just give them 2 values. I gave them 3 instead. Let me eliminate the second address. And 10. Let us send the coin. The transaction is performed successfully. So when we open this transaction to see its details, we can see the transaction hash. So like we were explaining till now, this is the hash address of the block, which is validated and kept in the blockchain. Here we can see from address. So the default value that we used on top here to send the ethers, that is the from address, and 2 is the secondary value that we copied. So we have sent it to this smart contract, to this address. We do not have to, worry about the gas because it is well within the limit. All the transaction and processing power that it required for the transaction and execution is well within the limit that we have set. So it is a, not so memory intensive transaction. This again we see is the hash generated for this whole transaction. And out of the logs, here we go. In a JSON format, we can see that it has gone from this address to this address, and 10 is the value. 10 from 2. So with this, we see that our coins are being transacted, and we have a working crypto system. Now that we've sent address to this address, let's see. Yeah, we'll copy this address again from the top, come back here, paste it here, and we will try getting the balance. Now that we've got the balance, let us open this. Yeah, just give me a second. I am sorry, the balance is not being demoed. Not, yeah. Okay. So we just have a small hiccup here. Yeah. Okay. So the get balance function has returned its output right here. We had initially entered, just a minute, let us resize this. We had initially entered 10,089. We had transacted 10 coins in this, and the balance here shows 10,079. So that comes the end of our program. So with this, we have written a Solidity smart contract, compiled it, and deployed it on their own test network, where we can transfer coins between two addresses. Thank you very much. I hope that was informational. And if any of you have any doubts, you could, either mail Apurva or you could mail me. I would be glad to help all of you. I think we do not have enough time at hand, so I cannot take questions about it right now. In the meanwhile,
Nikhil, only 1 minute, please. Nikhil,
yes,
only 1 minute. We have done programming very long back, but since the way you have explained, we are able to write the code. But after the code, I just missed some line. I couldn't connect with you how you compiled or run. Please, if you could provide that step so that we can practice today and we are back in the class tomorrow. Otherwise, we will lose the track. Everything code is written, but those steps after that, if it is somewhere with you so that you can share with me, with all the participants, in fact, so that we can run the program today. Thank you.
Okay, ma'am. So I do not have this noted down anywhere.
Yeah, definitely.
But
It might not be on. Yeah.
yeah, in lieu of time, if you want, I could just show it once again very quickly. So that,
Yeah. If you can do that, I will catch with that. Yes.
Yeah. So in the compile step,
yes.
Yeah, I will. So after writing the code, I will just start from compilation.
Yes,
so once we finish writing code, this is the first step we execute. We press this button, which goes to the Solidity compiler. In the Solidity compiler, we will have the name of our coin or our smart contract. So when we have selected the name of the smart contract we want to deploy, we will just click on compile button.
Okay.
So doing that would compile, the smart contract for us. And if there are any errors and warnings, it would show below in such boxes. It would also show it next to the lines here, right here. But it will also show you boxes like this showing main errors. Now that we have no errors, just a single warning, our compilation is done. We can go to running the JavaScript or running the Solidity code. So here I have not, touched upon anything here. All of them are default values. I will straight out come here, the demo coin, and this is the correct, file that has to be deployed. So I will just click on deploy. Once I click on deploy, it will deploy my program to, that blockchain network. So my smart contract will be written on their smart chain. So yeah, this was my first deployment. We can close that. Yeah, this once you press deploy, okay, I'll show it again. All this is cleared. You
Yeah,
just
all
press,
this is clear.
yeah, you
Yes,
just
it's
press
clear.
deploy and this comes up here.
Okay.
There's nothing, it's blank and deploy. Yeah. So this comes up every time you deploy it. And once that is deployed, if you click the drop down button, you will see all the functions that we have entered here. So here, address of the receiver, you can copy a 64-bit hash value from anywhere. Let's say, no, not this. Okay, I think my system is hanging. So yeah, you can copy a 64-bit hash value, and after you paste the hash value, just type a comma and a space and the amount that you want to transact, and you can click on the send coin. This will show you logs here. Wait, no, that's the whole program. So if I say this is the address where JA56B is the address, and I have to send 10 coins to it. I could just send 10 coins to it, and that will show us the log. Yeah, okay. So the address that I have sent is wrong, but otherwise, yeah, if I use one of these addresses, yeah. So any 64-bit value should be fine. We have to just paste that value, comma, and separate the argument 10, and you could just send the coin. And we should see that there is a green tick mark here that shows that the contract was executed successfully and the transaction has occurred successfully and validated. So here we can see. So from address to address and the value 10. So I can change this value also. We will make it 1000 if I send coin. Yeah, that should also show the next transaction where you can see, yeah, the value sent is 1000 rupees or 1000 tokens. So that's how we use the uh, cryptocurrencies, or that's how we use Remix ID to transfer tokens.
All right. Thank you.
No,
We'll
no.
try today. We'll try today.
Yes,
Thank you.
ma'am. Yes,
Yeah.
definitely.
Thank you.
So I think we've taken a little bit of extra time. It was supposed to end at 4:15, I believe, but you all have been a very patient and a wonderful audience. Thank you so much for spending your day with us today. I hope you got to take away something.
I mean, it's not a patience. It is we are learning out of it and lot many things. You are doing favor to us that you are teaching us something because we have left it long back. That is the problem. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You all
Thank
been
you.
wonderful. Have a
Thank
good
you.
evening.
Yeah.
I hope
And
the
Nikhil?
session was productive for you people. I really enjoyed, showing whatever bit of knowledge or skill that my teachers had taught me. I could make it, informational and a very interactive session for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Nikhil and Purva, for spending your half a day. We do understand the schedule that you have. Still, you have spent your time, valuable time, and gave all this information to us. Thank you very much from the Department of Computer Science and also from JSS College and all the participants here. Thank you.
Thank you,
And
sir. It was our pleasure.
thank
Yes,
you.
sir.
Thank you,
Thank you
Purva.
very much.
Yeah, dear participants, I have shared tomorrow's link. The session will start at 10 o'clock tomorrow. Please do attend that. And I also
Right.
shared the feedback link. And
Right.
there is no attendance in the sense in Microsoft Team, we have this attendance which we can download. And from the time we
Right.
have started until end, the entire attendance is available with us. We will take care of that. No separate attendance. Feedback is also considered as an attendance because that gives us more input on how we can improve the sessions. Thank you, everyone. We will
Naveen
meet
sir,
tomorrow at 10 o'clock.
Naveen sir,
Yeah.
sorry to disturb. Naveen sir, thank you so much first and foremost for you to conduct it so nicely. Naveen sir, can we get a recording of the sessions today so that we can
Sure.
practice it? Please.
Sure, ma'am.
Is it on
Only
the
thing
Teams?
is,
Record it
sorry,
is on the.
ma'am.
Can we download from the Teams, sir?
Yeah. No, ma'am. Actually, since means all the speakers are from company,
Okay.
I have to take their consent before I share it.
Okay, sir. Right.
Just give me 1 or 2 days. I will
Perfect.
take the consent from the speakers,
Perfect, sir.
and accordingly, I will keep uploading so that it is available to you.
Thank you, Naveen sir. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, everyone. We'll meet tomorrow at 10 o'clock.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Apurva. Thank you, Nikhil.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.